Awesome. Okay, we are going to go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our first Facebook Live of the year for the NVLD project. We're very excited to have you all here and to get some updates on our DSM Inclusion Project that our researchers have been working on diligently for the last few years. If you are not joining us live, as always, this will be recorded and uploaded to our YouTube page and will live in the video section of our Facebook page, and you can always watch it later. If you do have any comments or questions after the live is over and you want those answered or attended to at a later time, please just leave those in the comment section and we will get to them later in the week or early next week. My name is Samantha. I am the host of the NVLD Project Facebook Lives, and today I have with us Dr. Prudence Fisher from Columbia University Medical Center. We've chatted with her before, and today we are just going to talk about the DSM Inclusion Project. It's been about 2 years since we had a Facebook Live about this subject, so really excited to get some updates on that. We've been funding a project at Columbia University for a couple years now. The aim of which is to have NVLD included in the DSM. And if you don't know what any of that means, it's okay. We're totally going to explain all of it to you here. So welcome, Dr. Fisher. Thank you so much for joining us again. I'm excited to speak with you today.
Okay, so I think I did this about 2 years ago, but I understand that, first of all, it's been 2 years, but there are also people who are here who weren't here 2 years ago. So I'm going to sort of start from the beginning.
Absolutely.
And so what happened is the NVLD project came to Columbia and they expressed interest. They want to get NVLD into the DSM. And why do you want something in the DSM? The reason you want something in the DSM is because that's the sort of, quote, the Bible, where all the diagnoses live that clinicians can write down and get reimbursed for if they provide any kind of treatment or whatever. And it's hooked with the ICD codes that you see on insurance forms and stuff. But also it is how people qualify for getting services and accommodations in the educational system. And so it's sort of important to have a code in there. And in the past, the DSM-5 came out in 2013. And before that, the previous version, DSM-4, had something that was called learning disorder not elsewhere specified. And so people who would have NVLD would often get that diagnosis. It was in the DSM. That's no longer in the DSM-5. Right? So there's not a place to put this. And, NVLD hasn't been included in the DSM. So there's not a code somebody can use. The other thing about having it in the DSM that is quite important, I think, is that although DSM isn't a textbook, it's often used as a textbook in graduate training, training nurses, training doctors, how to think about diagnoses. And in fact, in the course I teach in the School of Social Work at Columbia, I'm teaching social workers, we use the DSM. Like we go through the different chapters, and this is what an anxiety disorder is, and this is how you make the diagnosis. By not being in the DSM, it's not going to be taught. Right? So people aren't going to know how to recognize it. So it's going to increase recognition of this, and it's not recognized. Often a child will have a lot of difficulties and nobody sort of knows what's wrong. And then and this isn't there, they've never heard of it. And you can't get your child help because he's having a visual spatial thing. Well, what's that? Like, what is that? And so it's just a really big problem. And often people won't get the diagnosis for several years after they've been experiencing problems, or they won't get it at all, right? So it is important to get it in the book. Now, most of my work is in research. It's also important in research. And we did a systematic review several years ago. Well, not several, a couple of years ago. And what we found is that everybody's using different definitions, which makes it really hard to interpret different findings. And also, it's hard to combine findings together. Not having the DSM and having it be unrecognized actually makes it hard to get funding,
Yep.
to do research in this area. And there's a lack of interest in doing research on somebody who does something that people don't know what it is. So, I mean, there are a lot of reasons why you want to have it in the DSM.
Yeah. So basically, to recap, as far as the opportunities or the reasons that we want to include it, is one, for recognition by all professionals so that they're diagnosing the same NVLD with the same kind of criteria. Two, to get services kind of like with insurance and different doctors and therapy help and stuff like that. And then also to help us with our research, because we can't really do a whole lot of research or apply for grants and stuff without it being an official recognized disorder, which is kind of this whole catch-22 that we've been stuck in for the last however many years of we need to do more research, but you can't get grants for the research. So it's kind of, that would be very helpful as well, correct?
Yeah. So
Perfect.
there's a lot of that.
Yeah.
So, I believe it's important. And I had a nephew who had NVLD. I saw that I didn't know what was going on.
Yeah.
I was just annoyed at him all the time, and then when I figured out what it was, it's like, oh, so, yeah, it is important.
Yeah. And then,
But
like you said at the very beginning, awareness and recognition worldwide, just more people knowing about it and understanding kind of what it is and what it isn't also, which we'll kind of get into here in just a minute as well.
so
Um,
the first thing in terms of getting in DSM
Yep.
is you have to have a definition,
Yep.
right? And it's not like, who are we at Columbia just to come up with a definition? And so what we did is we involved a group of, say, recognized NVLD experts to help us come up with a definition. So it wasn't like Prudence is sitting in her office and she comes up with it. It's like, who is she, right? And we had some conferences with them, and we sort of worked through and made some decisions. And I have to tell you, the first decision and the first conference that, me being new to the field, pointed out, like, nonverbal learning disability. That's a problem. And it's a problem because it's very confusing. Because using the word nonverbal, the person on the street, and indeed people who support our work, will misinterpret it. They'll say, oh, they don't talk. That's, they're nonverbal, they're not talking. That's not the problem. And the reason it became called nonverbal learning disability, because it came out of the field of education, and it was being considered as, it's a learning disability, not verbal in nature. So the verbal things are like reading and stuff like that. So it's not that. It's not a verbal, it's a nonverbal one, right? But it's very confusing. It's very confusing to people. And the other thing is it a learning disability? Because it affects many areas of somebody's life. And in the DSM, learning disabilities are about academic skills. So there's specific learning disabilities in reading, in math, and writing or something. And this is something that, sort of like when you think about something like attention deficit disorder or a language disorder, that can affect many areas of your life. It's not just academic skills. It's like functioning generally, right? And so I think in two different ways, the name was not great. And we talked to the advisors, and so we together, it wasn't like I just made it up, but together we came up with a new name, which emphasized what the core problem is, which is visual spatial. So we called it Developmental Visual-Spatial Disorder. And the reason we put the developmental in there is because it's something like that people have when they're small, in the early developmental period, and it can last through their lives, but it's not like all of a sudden when you're 15, you have this thing. It's something you sort of always had, right?
Yeah.
And so, and by calling it developmental, it would get it in the chapter of the DSM with the other disorders that start when kids are young. Okay. And so there's a lot, it took a while to come up with that. And then it has a parenthetical that says nonverbal learning disability, so people know where it's coming from, right? And so it was a long time. There are many iterations of coming up with the final definition. The other thing about DSM is a manual for clinicians, right? And all the diagnoses in a DSM have behavioral descriptions of what is a person like. It's not a score on a test, and so in coming up with the definition, we thought a lot about, well, what are different domains of visual spatial problems? And we wrote a behavioral definition for it. And that's what took a long time.
Yeah.
And making it so clinicians, like typical clinicians, some are social workers, some are psychiatrists, psychologists, so they know what you're talking about. And if you look in the DSM, you'll see that you can sit and read it and understand what they're talking about. Like, what would somebody see?
Yeah.
And unlike a lot of people get the diagnosis, although we recommend neuropsych testing, educational testing, etc., we don't require it. And that was a huge debate. And the reason it's not being required is because the testing is not cheap, and a lot of people couldn't afford the testing. And we were thinking in terms of letting this diagnosis be available for a wide number of people. Like, if you don't have any money, neuropsych tests you can pay $6,000 and $7,000 for, and not everybody can afford that. A lot of people can't afford it, and the school system's not going to pay for it. So we had to come up with a behavioral definition, and that took quite a lot of work, although we do recommend testing. And so we went through this long process, a couple conferences, numerous meetings, lots of input from many people. It's a very long iterative process. We came up with this definition in DSM type format, and we submitted it to the DSM. And the criteria looked pretty good, frankly. But what happened, which we should have thought, before I get to that, when you submit something to the DSM, this is a new disorder for DSM, and you do this proposal and you check a little box like, this is a big change. A new disorder is a big change. And typically for a new disorder, it's not going to go straight into the book where you can start using it. It goes through a section that's called criteria for disorders that need more study. It's sort of, and basically what that section is doing, it's putting out the definition. So other people will weigh in on it, and they do weigh in on it. So post it, and you get lots of comments. But also it's giving a common criteria set that not just us, other people can use and actually test it and get more information on it. And then once you get a lot of information, it moves into the name book. So in terms of DSM-5, between DSM-4 and DSM-5, the persistent bereavement response used to be in that part, and now it's in the main book. And you can write it down. It's an ICD codable disorder. You can bill and do everything else. But it's nothing that's new, given the process, is going to go straight into the book without a lot behind it. So we handed in this proposal, pitching it as a condition for further study. And they came back, they said, yeah, and the proposal had a lot of other stuff. You had to have validity and reliability and all this other stuff. But the fact is, it's totally new. So you're not going to have a lot of data on the new definition. You have sort of data on NVLD, different studies, and the systematic review we did, and then you look at sort of near neighbor type things and what it predicts. But they came back and they said, even as a condition for further study, you need to have some data, because that's just the way it works. Like, we're not, even though it looks really good, we're not just going to put it in the book. And so, and the kinds of things that they want to know is, can clinicians use, do they understand the criteria? And so we did a study looking at that. And then they also want to know, is it useful? Like, is it important? The clinical utility, do they find it useful? Does it help them explain to their patients? Do the people that these criteria identify, do they need services? Like, are they a needy group that's sort of not being recognized? Like, is it important to recognize them? The other thing that they sort of want to know is it just something of some part of something else? Like, years ago, now at this point, it has been years, that a lot of people thought that people with NVLD, well, they really have autism. It's just a variant of autism. But we had done a study of a lot of people have been given the diagnosis, and we found that, in fact, a lot of them had never had a diagnosis of autism. So it's not subsumed by one other diagnosis. So it's not like it's a subtype of autism. It, like all the neurodevelopmental disorders, they're often comorbid, meaning that you can have autism and you can have ADHD, or you can have ADHD and not have autism. So, but it's not uncommon for people who, like, in terms of, say, ADHD, a lot of kids with ADHD have a learning disability. A lot, so they come in groups, and this certainly isn't subsumed under one of these disorders. And there are people who only would have this, but like the other things in that chapter, a lot of them are often comorbid with other things. And also with this, they're often comorbid with anxiety. Like, we found in the survey we did that most of the people who answered the survey, they're like, I think we did a survey of adults that had like 200 and something people, and a survey about kids, and their parents answered it. But in both of those, a lot of the subjects had also had an anxiety disorder, right? Yeah. So, it's all one brain. I mean, you can have different things. It's not like having an earache and a sprained ankle. It's like it's all coming from one place. So that's not something that's bad to have, but it's something that is recognized. And in fact, in a lot of there has been some research that's shown that you can differentiate it from ADHD, you can differentiate from autism. We had to make that case as well. And so we did this study to get more input from clinicians. What didn't they find clear on this new criteria set? Could they use it? Could they, we gave a vignette study. And what we're doing right now is it's under review by our institutional review board. We're doing more of a clinical utility study where we will have clinicians evaluated somebody who will also include this in their evaluation and give us some information about how useful it is, how much does it match the person they're seeing, and it will give us some information about if they've had neuropsych testing. They'll give us test results, and we can look at how it agrees with neuropsych testing. So that's sort of what we're doing now. I'll tell you that putting together the definition and doing all this, took like about 6 or 7 years. And we recently found out that a paper that described the whole process for putting the definition together is going to be in the Journal of the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, which is like the premier child psychiatry journal, which was really important to me since DSM is coming out of the American Psychiatric Association. We went defined as a disorder there, that I thought was pretty important to get it in the Child Psychiatry Journal, because it's prestigious. you know, sorry, I mean, it's good for me personally, but it's also good for the cause, you know.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
so we're really excited about it. And now people can actually get it, because what they do in that journal is they have things that are in press. So it's something they can get it at even before it is officially published in the journal. And it will be on open, like it will be like open. So um, a lot of what a lot of journals are doing, they allow you to select, do you want it to be an open thing? You pay a fee. And that means people can download it without being connected to a university library. So they get access to the university. And so it's an open journal. You know, a lot of journals are
Very
doing that.
important for more people to just be able to read it and kind of understand. And I think real quick, just going back to the whole 6 or 7 years, there's a huge, I won't say misconception, but I think people think that this is a much quicker process. We get asked about it all the time. Why is it taking so long? How long does it take? When is this going to be done? When she says create a definition or come up with a definition and name has taken years, like you're not just, I don't even know what to compare it to. You're not just like defining a color or like, I don't even know because it's so complex when it comes to creating this definition and a name that matches and works, that this takes years, and it has taken years, and it will take a little bit more time as well. So for everybody that asks and wants this done quickly, believe us, we all want it done quickly. I think
We all want to be done with it.
yes, everyone would love to be done with it and for it to be accepted, but it does take time. And the reason it takes time is because you want to get it right. We want to make sure that everything is correct and accurate and usable by clinicians and whatever it is. So just really quick to touch on that. And then we will also share the link for that journal article once we have it on our Facebook page. So you will be able to access that as well. Sorry.
You know, one thing I should have mentioned is when we started out and we were working with NVLD experts, and you can think about the NVLD, they're like true believers in the diagnosis, right? Like everybody wants it in. But one of the things that I thought was a really good thing that we did in the process is that the NVLD project set up a scientific council, right? And so the scientific council was made up of people who was pretty known experts in child diagnosis, right? And in the near neighbor diagnoses like autism and ADHD, and like recognized experts. And so like we came along with the LD people, were all the believers, we went this in, but we were able to get a critical feedback like, well, I don't really understand this. Like, and so it wasn't like you're preaching to the choir, but you got an outside like review,
Yeah.
which was really helpful because things got pointed out that just weren't that clear. Because you know you're too in it.
You're
Where
so
you're
involved
yeah,
and
we know what it is, and it's like if you have somebody, it's like, well, I don't quite understand this one. Like this isn't clear to me. And so that was incredibly helpful. And also, we did 2 different workshops at the child psychiatry meetings where we had people come in and look at the criteria, like people in the field. They're not all child psychiatrists, they're people who are just feeling good at meeting. And they gave us a lot of very helpful feedback. And we also, you know, just from people who are interested in the work who would contact us, we would, you know, we had a lot of sidebar conversations or just showing somebody the criteria and getting feedback and thinking about it. And I don't know, like a lot of stuff I've done is in like developing measures and stuff like that. And everybody thinks it's going to be really fast and you can sit down like one afternoon and do it, but it's just not how it works. Like you have to do it and then go and then come back and look at it with fresh eyes and get somebody else who's not a believer to look at it and like what's confusing to you. And you get pushed on it a lot. And it's a lot of up here, you know, it's not just cranking something out, like asking that person and getting a lot of opinions.
A lot of
It has
opinions.
taken a long time.
Yeah. So
Hopefully it's
what would you say our current like status is? Where do we sit today? And then what would be the next steps in this process?
well, I think where we sit today is, I mean, I think since it's where it's going um, in the section 3, you know, where there's more research needed. I think that between some of the studies that are currently going on, I think that we will have some data that supports putting this in on this new definition. And so that will help a lot. And so I think we have a pretty good shot because we sort of are addressing what their concerns are. And the study that we're starting should be done fairly quickly. It won't be published by then, but we would at least have the data to support it.
Yeah.
And so, we're hoping in the fall, and then what will happen? So it'll be in the book, and hopefully other people will be testing it out. But there are a lot of other studies that could support it, and in the paper that I submitted, it's coming out in JCAP. I outline a number of different kinds of studies that could do to further support it, and hopefully there'll be funding for those kinds of studies. But it's hard to, takes work, right? I will say that in the last couple of years, it's gotten a lot more publicity and people have been recognizing it a lot more. Like even today, when I was having a conversation with somebody about a completely different topic about diagnosis, and she's a neuropsychologist and she's in a clinic where they're evaluating a lot of kids. And I said, well, how do you see kids with NVLD? She goes, yeah, and we always have to sort of ride around it. Like we see them and it's really unused. And I said, well, we're doing the study and I'm going to need some clinicians. She goes, oh, I have a bunch of, so, I mean, and they've heard of it, but they're not quite sure what to do with it. And, there's a postdoc at Columbia who's actually who was gathering data, has a small award where she'll look at in a population of kids who have some neurodevelopmental disorders and learning disorders, a minority underrepresented population. Do some of them have NVLD, but it's not recognized because it's not even considered.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of interest in people using it because they haven't had something to use,
They've
right?
they've been diagnosing a certain thing, but not truly believing that's exactly what it is.
Or like the other thing that we found in some of these surveys is that people will go for a long time and not know.
Mhm.
Like they know there's something wrong, and because sometimes they'll call me up after the survey and they want to talk more about it. But it's stuff like it's been years that there's something it's just not quite fitting.
Yeah.
The other thing that's really amazed me is when I talk to people and they say, "Oh, are you working on it?" I'll tell them about this project. They go, "Oh, my daughter has that," and they'll tell me this long story. Or, I've had like colleagues like who will have a son who's not doing well and he's doing this, and they'll say, and I think he may, and I'll talk to them about this project. They go, oh, it sounds just like him. So it's I wouldn't say people are coming out of the woodwork, but I mean a lot of people are bringing stuff like this up that it's just not there.
Yeah. And I
So
think that's where the prevalence study comes in too, is that 3 to 4% that's kind of been predicted in the prevalence study. Just it is, I won't say like common is not the right word, but people do have this that don't know. And we get those stories that you're getting, Prudence, too, all the time as at the nonprofit, is people emailing us, they got adult diagnosis, or they've been searching for answers for their kids forever, and they read something on our website that just fit them to a T. And
It
so
sounded like their kid, right?
exactly, yeah. And I do think, we've had some media in the last few years with some people coming out and speaking about NVLD. So I definitely think that awareness is growing, and now we just need this next step of a true diagnosis so that people can diagnose and then treat and whatever else that includes. So
And also, like I brought this story up before, but I live in the suburbs, and we had good schools, good school district and stuff like that. And there was a consultant. I was talking to this consultant about it, and he was coming in and teaching teachers how to teach about writing essays or something. And then he was saying, basically it was like, you just put all your ideas down and you draw these circles and these lines and the thing. And I looked at him, I said, well, and our school district is paying quite a bit of money for this. And I said to him, so what about the kids of NVLD? And he goes, what? Like he had no idea what I was talking about. And I thought, well, that's great. So like 5% of the kids aren't going to get this.
yeah,
I mean, it was just really just like not even thinking about stuff like that. Or we did a thing at part of our workshop that we did at child psychiatry meetings was talking about, a lot of the disorders that evidence-based practices for treating things like anxiety and et cetera involve some visual component
yeah,
that somebody with NVLD is not going to do well on. So, how could you think about a lot of commonly used evidence-based treatments? How would you apply it to somebody who had NVLD?
yeah.
So, and people came up to us after, wow, I never thought of that, but it was sort of interesting because, in a lot of studies, there's a group of kids who can't do it, or
Yeah,
don't benefit, so
absolutely.
stuff like that.
Cool. Well, we do have a couple of comments and questions. Okay. Let's see. So I do have someone asking if we could share the behavioral definition that was written. They want to share it with doctors, neurologists, and mental health therapists. So we do have some information on our website that you could share with those.
Also, if you got now that the paper has been accepted, the definition's included in that.
Is that the report of a work group on nonverbal learning disability? We've got some sleuths in our comments. They've already posted this for us. So they've already found it and posted it. So the definition is in that paper as well.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. It's already published for the person that asked if it was when it would be published. It looks like it is online. I don't know if the full report is currently available. It looks like it might be.
It is. It's online.
Yep. Okay, perfect. So
And
thank you.
that's a preprint. I mean, basically they put it up there and then they come back and they say, it could have a typo in it, or they're like little things that you find when you write a paper like that, that when it gets set in stone and goes in the actual magazine thing,
Yeah.
it'll change a little bit. But right now they're having that on their website so people can get to it.
Yeah. Well, they've already found it. They're on top of it in our comment section. And then, yeah, I honestly think that's it. That's most of the questions was just about the paper. People are very interested in just learning more about this process. Have somebody commented they've got an adult daughter with NVLD diagnosed when she was young, does not get any services, and they're wanting to get it in the DSM so that she can get some services. So many stories like that. That's why our founder started the nonprofit and started funding the research for it, is because there are no it's hard to find services. And
Well, I mean, a big thing that's missing in the literature, because I did the literature review,
yeah.
is there's nothing on adults. Like what happens, right? Like people do grow up,
Kids grow up.
but there's nothing about that. And so in the survey we did that we're writing up now, we do ask like what happened? Like, what are sort of the issues in your life? So it's it's sort of like a free floating thing, but it's a limited sample, but there's nothing in the literature really, in the
Yeah.
research literature. I mean, it was sort of amazing to me actually, because even though I'd had this experience with my nephew and I'm in Jessica, I didn't, this wasn't like my area. Mine is like the more like anxiety, depression. And I was just amazed at what there isn't.
Yeah.
But it's not surprising if it's not recognized that there's not going to be a lot of research on it.
Yep.
One of the things we're doing that I think is useful is we're developing screens that we hope will be useful for people to use, like a parent could fill out or an adolescent could fill out, that could pick up people who should probably get a fuller evaluation. Because I think having an easy to use screen would go a long way, in the same way, like you can get things online, you can screen kids for ADHD or for anxiety disorder, but it's the same kind of thing. And it could be useful in educating parents and teachers, because I think teachers really need the education. From
For
what
sure.
I've heard.
As a former educator, I can attest to that as well. Um, um, oh gosh, okay, comments are coming in, so it keeps like pushing down. I don't know that we have an answer for this one. I'm going to throw it out there. If you don't have an answer, don't feel comfortable answering, just tell me, because we don't want to answer anything that we don't know. But I have someone asking if this is a condition that can be passed down between generations.
I have no idea.
So we don't have enough information for that. Is there more info in the NVLD project for adults? So that kind of goes back to what I'm so glad Prudence brought that up, because we get this email and comment all the time that why is everything for kids? There's nothing for adults. And we agree, and that's why we're doing what we're doing and why we're funding these projects, is we are trying to get information and help for adults. And the DSM, again, is that first step. It has to be recognized so that services can then be provided. So we
I mean,
get it.
but part of it is that it started with kids, because
Yes.
it was coming out of education.
Yeah.
You
So
know,
we're
so, yeah.
trying. It's not that we don't want to help adults or that no one cares. It's just that it's not there. So we're working on that. We're looking for that information, and everything we're doing is to help everybody, not just children. Having this in the DSM will help everybody in the end. Is this a condition? Is homeschooling? Okay, I've got some questions coming through on my phone. Give me just a second. I don't see this question, so I don't have a lot of background on it, but Paula said someone is asking, how does the diagnosis coordinate with IEP? So I think the question is, how would the diagnosis in the DSM affect an IEP in the
Well,
school?
it would be nice to have, I mean, right now it's not going to be included in IEP because it's not in the DSM.
On the DSM, it has to be in the DSM for you to have it included
Yeah,
on
yeah,
IEP.
like people,
Yeah.
IEPs, you have ADHD, you have this and that. I mean, it's not that you can't pick up that a child has difficulties in a certain area. I'm not sure, actually.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that if it's in the DSM, it's gonna get more notice, because what happens is people can go through and get this diagnosis from neuropsychologists, and then they go to school and like, what's that? They don't know what you're talking
They
about.
don't understand it. Yeah. And in
Yeah.
that situation, if you are in that situation, if you have a school that does want to learn more about NVLD, or a teacher that is really interested in helping your student, because there are teachers out there who will go that extra mile, we do have an educational presentation. It's like a video with a downloadable PDF that you can share with schools that I think is very helpful. We did it with Winston Prep. So there is some help out there, but And then she sent through another question, and I, again, don't have background on what the question is, but how to expand DSM integration with school accommodation. I'm not sure that I fully understand what that question is.
Well, I think this is what I think you're getting at. It's like if you know somebody has this and they need accommodations, I mean, they're going to need the diagnosis to get the accommodations, right? And so I
Yeah,
think it's better to find and recognize then accommodations might be more forthcoming than if it's not there because nobody knows what it is.
yeah,
So I think it would help people get appropriate accommodations. Also, I do think that it would encourage more research or some research on interventions. Like what are helpful interventions? What kind of accommodations in a systematic way? I mean,
yeah,
there are some clinical things that are written and this person wrote and this is what they think, but you don't even know what their definition was for what they think. So
yeah,
I mean it would could systematize it a bit so it's paid attention to in a better way. It's more sort of scientific to a different, to a certain extent. It's not so like idiosyncratic to a particular clinician. I
yeah.
think.
And there are some
Even
people,
though clinician is really good, it's just
yeah.
sort of,
Yeah, and there are some people leaving comments in the comment section if the other people asking about accommodations want to read that. We won't necessarily give advice because we're not treating and or diagnosing your children between the NVLD project and Dr. Fisher here. But there are some things that can be done to help out in schools with an IEP. So maybe just read through some of the comments, but also talk to the professional that's working with your child. If they don't know what NVLD is, maybe just share our website with them. They can learn a little bit more from us and the research that's been done, and then maybe they can help you come up with things that can be included in the IEP to help your student without an official NVLD diagnosis, if that makes sense. Because we
yeah.
don't want to I am not a professional, and Prudence is a researcher and not treating your children. So it's just like one of those things where we're happy to help you find a professional if you don't have one, but definitely talk to your therapist or your psychologist or whoever you're working with. But yes, you can read the comments is what I will leave that at. I think we've answered most of the questions. Again, they're coming in kind of fast and some of them are the same. So it keeps pushing them down on my screen and I can't keep up with them. But what we're going to do is we'll go through the comments tomorrow once everybody's had a chance to watch and kind of catch up. And we'll respond to any comments tomorrow that we didn't get to today, just so that we can have a chance to look through them and kind of go through that. Plus, we're at kind of our 45-minute mark. So we're gonna go ahead and I think call it a day. Is there anything else that you wanted to share before I kind of cut you off? Nothing.
Yeah.
A lot of good information, background of the DSM, why we're working on this project, where we currently sit, and what the next steps are. So it's kind of everything that we talked about today. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us again. Like I said, it's been 2 years, so there's been a lot of change and we've got a lot of new people that are now aware of NVLD who want to know a little bit more about it. So really exciting to kind of hear these updates and hear the progress that has been made over the last few years as well.
Okay.